Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us today. This webinar will be focusing on package travel regulations and how important they are for you as a Scottish tourism business. I'm pleased to be joined by legal experts from travel law firm Travlaw, renowned for their deep expertise in the travel industry. They will guide you through a comprehensive presentation on package travel regulations, providing valuable insights on when and why these regulations are relevant to your business. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this presentation, so please stay with us to have your questions answered. I would now like to introduce you to Nick Parkinson and Connor Askins, who are joining us from Travlaw.
Thanks, Alison, for that introduction, and thank you everyone for attending. I think it's quite a good turnout for a Tuesday morning. I see 40 plus people have joined us today. So just to give you the very quick headline as to what we're going to be doing today, this is going to be a crash course in the package travel regulations, which apply over the whole United Kingdom. So it applies equally England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Very little difference between those countries. So if we want to get started, because we've got quite a lot to go through, like I say, we're going to absolutely smash through a whole regulation, and we're going to distill this down to all the most key points so that you can go away without having information overload. So yeah, if we can get the next slide, Alison, and we'll get cracking, because the first thing we always want to do when we're talking about the package travel regulations is we don't just want to jump straight in and start thinking about, what is a package and all the details. Before we do anything, we just want to take a step back and say, well, hang on, do these regulations even apply? So the question that we're asking here is, what countries are you selling into? Now, there may be companies here who say, well, I'm based in Scotland, of course. I sell all over the world. Some people may say, I only sell to the UK market. Some people may have a sort of EU market with a bit of UK. And there might be people here who are saying, well, actually, to be honest, my market is 95% US customers. For whatever reason that is, I target the US market. That's who I go for. I bring them over here from the US or Canada, so outside the UK and outside the EU. So these are important distinctions. So I guess the key to this really is these regulations come from the EU. Obviously, we're not in the EU anymore, but they still apply in the UK. So we can pretty much guess that if you're selling to EU countries, France, Germany, and so on, you're going to have to deal with these regulations. You're certainly going to have to deal with them if your customers are in the UK. However, if you are selling to the rest of the world, then all bets are off. So you probably don't have to deal with these regulations. There's a little detail there to think about, to be sure. But like I say there at the bottom, the situation is that probably there's a lot less red tape. If you deal with an American lawyer, Canadian lawyer, they'll probably tell you that they think the EU rules are crazy in terms of how generous they are to consumers, how burdensome they are for businesses. So this is why it's important, because you might think, whoa, I don't need to do all these things. I don't need insolvency protection. I don't need to give all these high obligation refund rights and so on and so on. All these things we're going to talk about, you might not need to worry about it if you can actually devise your business in such a way to say, well, actually, I'm only selling to the EU, Canada, not the EU, I'm selling to Canada or America, Australia, and therefore potentially you don't have to worry about these regulations. So we'll just dig a little bit into more detail about that. So if Alison, you could just take us on to the next slide, where we just have a few factors to consider. So immediately people are going to say, oh, well, how do I know? How do I know? Am I selling to the US? How does this being determined? So the starting point, to be honest, is just look at the stats. If you look at your clients and 95% of them are American, that's not a coincidence. I'm going to guess that there's a reason for that. Presumably you are targeting that market. If you've got 90% sort of UK customers and then there's like a 10% various people from all over the world, that sounds like it could just be organic customers who are coming, finding your website and just sort of trickling their way over organically. So we're not so much interested in those. It's when we're targeting these countries. So the courts would look at these things. What language have you got on your website, your domain name? If you had a .usa domain name and you sold in dollars and all your you had some packages that sort of started in the US and brought people to Scotland, for example, then all that looks very much like you're targeting the US market. If, however, you've got a hotel in Scotland and you're adding things on, and you've got a .uk website, you only accept pounds. If your customers are mostly the UK market or the French market, the Spanish market, then we're going to say, okay, you're targeting the EU or the UK, whichever it is, and you're going to have to deal with these regulations essentially. So if we skip along, so where that takes us, having gone through that process, so it's an important exercise to stop and think, okay, where am I selling to? Think about those factors, and then deciding what to do. So some companies might come away with this potentially and say, okay, actually, what I would like to do is have a set of terms and conditions for the UK market, the EU market, maybe one for the US. Potentially, it depends on how big your business is. You could have one set of terms and conditions which deals with all of these markets. Obviously, the more you're dealing with, the higher volumes, the more incentive you'll have to think, okay, I'll have one set for Canada, one set for America. And you also need to look at the booking process. So it's not just about terms and conditions. If you've got a clause in there which says, this booking comes into effect when this happens, there's a bit of caution needed there, because even though all these signs would point towards you're selling into the UK, the USA, there's a potential technical argument to say that because you've done something in your terms and conditions, that all of a sudden, you've actually sold it, quote, in the UK, and therefore you still have to give people all these UK consumer rights. So, I don't want to labor on that point. I think the bottom line is, if you're unsure about any of these things, let us know. We can dig into this detail, examine your business, and just make sure it's right for you in terms of where you're selling and whether you need to worry about these regulations, or whether instead you should be talking to American lawyers, Australian lawyers, and so on. So also, whatever you think now, think ahead, because in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, you might suddenly start expanding and thinking, okay, I'm not just selling into the UK anymore, I'm going into the European market, more and more countries. It was just France, now I'm going for the whole EU market, and so on. So always just have this there to think about in the future, to come back to think, okay, I remember 3 years ago Nick said something about this, so I need to be careful. So think ahead. So if Alison, you can skip along, and so basically from here on, everything we say from here on is on the basis that you've decided you have to deal with these regulations. You're selling to either the EU or the UK market. So then the next question is, what is a package? And at this point, I hand over to my colleague, Connor.
Thanks, Nick, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us all. So yeah, that's a question. What is a package? So I'm sure everyone has, seen package holidays advertised when you're walking down the high street or, online. But what does this mean within the terms of the package travel regulations? So the regulations actually define a package as a combination of at least 2 different types of travel services for the purpose of the same trip or holiday. So that then leads us on to the question, what is a travel service? So you can see on the slide there, there's 4 different types of travel services. So the first one is carriage of passengers, which essentially just means transporting customers from A to B. So you're thinking here flights, coach, train travel. But you can see on the side there as well, it's important to note that short transfers to a hotel are not included. It's mainly, the major forms of transport. Secondly, we have accommodation, and that's accommodation of any type. We've also got vehicle hire, so that could be, car hire, or if you're cool enough to ride motorbikes too. And then lastly, we have other significant tourist services. So I think the first 3 in that list are all pretty self-explanatory and easy to follow. But it's that last one that can sometimes cause it a bit more difficulty, and Nick's going to explain that in a bit more detail later on. But can we just move to the next slide, please, Alison? Okay, so as always, there are some exceptions to this. So by exceptions, I mean where there's circumstances where a company is selling 2 travel services for the purpose of the same holiday, but for one reason or the other, that holiday does not fall within the scope of the regulations. So the first one on the slide there is business travel. So, but that's only if it's sold under a general agreement. So again, business travel, fairly straightforward concept to follow. You're thinking, you know, a business trip to a conference or something along those lines. And the reason we have this exception is because, as Nick explained, the regulations are really designed to protect consumers, and they're not as interested in businesses. But then, what is a general agreement? So this it can be another thing that can be a little bit confusing, but the regulations define that as an agreement which is concluded between a trader and another person acting for a trade, business, craft or profession for the purpose of booking travel arrangements in connection with that trade, business, craft or profession. So what does any of that mean really? So if you're looking at this in practical terms, so I think a one-off contract with a business to arrange business travel would not be exempt. That would still fall within the regulations. However, say that a business is booking 100 business trips a year to New York, for example, under the same terms with the same travel company, and that is in an agreement that's been written up, that would be exempt from the package travel regulations, and the exemption would apply. Next, we have day trips. So this is, you know, the 24-hour rule. So any package that lasts less than 24 hours is exempt from the package travel regulations. So an example here could be, you know, if you're selling a coach trip and a ticket to a Six Nations rugby game from, say, Aberdeen to Edinburgh, but you start at 6 o'clock in the morning and you return at 6 o'clock at night, or say 8 o'clock at night. If that's under 24 hours, that will be exempt from the package travel regulations. Again, it's important to note there, though, if accommodation is included, there will be no exemption. And then lastly, we have charity bookings. So these are non-for-profit sales made only occasionally to a limited group of people. So the regulations here are trying to really help organisations who are doing good work in the community, and they feel as though that these companies shouldn't really face the same onerous obligations that other travel companies do. So examples here could include, you know, charities or schools going on team building exercises such as Duke of Edinburgh trips. But it is really important to note that this will only be exempt if these services are not offered to the general public. So the services must only be offered to a limited number of people in that group. So in that previous example with the Duke of Edinburgh trip for a school, that trip would only be advertised and put on offer for the students of that specific school. Can I see the next slide, please, Alison? Thanks. So now we have some examples. So the first example, the customer books 3-day excursions for the same holiday. So there's a Highland Games, cycling tour, and Harry Potter tour. They're all booked at the same time. So is that a package? So here we have three excursions that would all arguably be a tourist service. But if we just click the slide, I think we'll get the answer. So no, we don't have a package here, and the reason is because there's only actually one type of travel service. So you need to have at least 2 different types of travel services to, you know, as a combination to turn that into a package under the regulations. I think we have another example on the next slide. So here it's slightly different because the customer has booked, again, a Harry Potter tour. And this time it includes a guided tour to various Harry Potter filming locations, and there's also some transport here. So there's clearly 2 travel services, but again, is that a package? No. So again, this is not a package because that day trip exclusion comes live because, you know, it's under 24 hours. They're starting at 8 o'clock in the morning and they're returning at 8 o'clock, so it's only 12 hours. Okay, and then the next slide is the final example. So with this example, we've got some accommodation. So the accommodation provider is selling a 1-night accommodation stay. However, 2 hours after the customer is booked, they've then contacted the accommodation provider and asked to supply some tickets for a Highland Games trip and a guided walking tour. So is that a package? Let's find out. No, again, on this occasion, it's not a package, and that's because the travel services have to be bought at the same time the booking is made. So in this scenario, we actually have 2 separate bookings. So 2 individual elements. We have firstly the accommodation only booking, and then we've got the 2 excursion bookings. So yeah, there's not many packages in those examples. But I'm now going to hand back to Nick, who's going to just go into a bit more detail about the significant tourist service as the fourth travel service in the regulations.
So yeah, thanks, Connor. And I'll also talk us through some examples. But before that, I'll just walk everyone through the framework, the rules as to this question about tourist services. So we go back to the 4 types of travel services: accommodation, straightforward; carriage, straightforward; vehicle hire, straightforward. Then it's this thing about significant tourist services. So okay, we need to dig into this in a bit more detail. So the very first thing we ask is, well, what even is a tourist service? It's easy to forget some real basic things sometimes. So travel insurance, well, that's not a tourist service, that's a financial service. Educational service is an interesting one, and this is debated, but I'm going to be decisive here and say it's not, although some people might disagree with me. But there are certainly companies that deal with outdoor education, and so I would say if the primary purpose of a certain service, some sort of outdoor activity was educational, and this is a thing, it's not all about having fun, but as opposed to sending the kids at the school to, Alton Towers just for a bit of a laugh, that's for leisure. But if it's for education, whatever that is, outdoor activities, Duke of Edinburgh, that kind of thing, so that's not a tourist service. And then you've got corporate events, weddings. So these are good examples that come up quite a lot, and we often get asked these questions. And, I think most of the time we'll be saying, no, these things are not tourist services. But then the examples of things that are concert tickets, sporting events, excursions, guided tours, ski passes, and these come straight from the European directive. So rental of sports equipment, I thought that was a bit of a funny one myself, but that's what the directive guidance says, and I think it's probably going to be difficult to deal with it. And the last one, spa treatment, I think is controversial, but again, it comes from an EU directive. That's what they say. So I think we probably have to accept that's probably going to be accepted. So anyone who, for example, has a hotel and you're thinking about adding on some sort of spa treatment day, you need to be careful, because all of a sudden you might be selling a package depending on the next questions, which we talk through now, if Alison can skip us to the next page. So we know what tourist service is, but we need to know what a significant tourist service is. And there are two ways it can be significant. The first is if it's marketed as an essential feature, or it just is an essential feature. So, the real classic example is, you've got a big advert which says, come for the World Cup final in Glasgow, whatever it is, that's that kind of thing. It's like, well, it's obviously an essential feature that you're going to go to this sporting event, whatever it is, whether it's rugby, football, the Highland Games. They've made it an essential feature. They're not coming just to stay at your hotel, they're coming for the event. So that's one way. The other way is if the tourist service represents 25% or more of the total cost of the trip. So these are either or. You don't need both of them. One of them, if you tick one of those boxes, it makes it significant. And then the reason why that's important to this whole discussion is because you could sell a package by accident, unwittingly, simply by having add-ons. So this is especially aimed at accommodation providers, but it can go the reverse way. So maybe someone does cycling tours and they want to sell accommodation on top. So as soon as you start branching out into selling these other things, you can unwittingly or knowingly sell a package. So obviously that's really important, because what we're going to talk about next is all the implications of selling packages. And there's a lot of implications, a lot of things you need to do, you need to be aware of, things you need to understand in order to obey the law, comply with the law, and protect yourself. Really important stuff. So the basics is really important. So you could sell a package, you might be liable for people who have accidents, and then you potentially can go bankrupt if you've not got the right insurance in place. And regulators could be very interested if they see that you're selling packages but you don't comply with the rules, and it's technically a criminal offence. And I think we'll go into that in a bit more detail later, but I think I've got some examples now. If we skip on, so first example, so we've got an accommodation provider who says, here's a Harry Potter carriage, I'm selling you 3 nights accommodation. It's got guiding tours to various Harry Potter filming locations. So the question is that a package? I'm going to be brave now and just say there's a raise your hand button at the top of the screen. I'll see if anyone thinks that is a package, press the raise your hand button, and I'll see. Oh, I see. Yeah, that seems to have worked, and a lot of people are saying yes, 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 yes. But don't say it just because you see other people doing it. Make your own decision. But I can see certainly 15 people think that it is a package, 16, and maybe more. So if Alison wants to reveal the answer, I'm not sure myself. Oh, it is. So the reason it is because of the way it was advertised. It doesn't matter how much it costs. It was an essential feature. Nobody's going to go and book this unless they're interested in this tourist service. So the tourist service must be significant. And because it's with accommodation, that's 2 travel services, that's a package. So the next example. And we have a list of things to do on a website. So an accommodation provider has a long list of things to do, which is absolutely perfectly acceptable. You want people to come to your area, your hotel. You say these are the things to do. But more than that, you let people book them through your website. So someone comes to the website, they say, yes, I want 3 nights accommodation, £800. And they say, oh wow, I can do a guided tour. I never thought that. That's something to do on Saturday. Oh yeah, why not? We'll do that. So add that to the basket. So unlike the last example, it wasn't marketed as a big thing. It wasn't saying, come here, come for the World Cup final. It was just a bit of a impulsive decision, last minute, from a long list of things to do. So it comes to £1,000 in total. It might require a bit of maths, which is why I never know the answer. So, Alison, do you want to put us out of our misery? Let us know the answer there. And the answer is no. So, like I say, it's not advertised as an essential feature, so it doesn't tick that box. And if you do the maths, 200 divided by £1,000, so the excursion cost overall is less than 25%. So that's not a package. So I think that's the last example. If Alison could flick along. And yes, so okay, so we know what a package is. Well, we know we know, first of all, when we need to worry about the regulations. So we need to think about where we're selling. We know what a package is, and we've even covered the thorny issue about tourist services. So now it's all about, if you are at the point of this conversation where you think, yes, I am selling packages, or I want to sell packages, this is what you need to know. So there may be people at the end who want to sort of discuss, am I in this category or not? Maybe some of your bookings are, some of them are not. But yeah, from here on, Connor will take over and just talk us through what you need to know.
Yep, thanks, Nick. Yes, so exactly that. We've discussed what a package is. We've discussed some examples there, but why does any of this matter? The reason is because it means a lot of different things for different companies. But the four main implications are on the screen there. So firstly, it gives the customers an enhanced set of rights. So the EU directive, which Nick mentioned earlier, and that lays the foundation for the UK regulations. They state that the purpose of the regulations is to strike the right balance between a high level of consumer protection and the competitiveness of businesses. So there's a real focus on ensuring that customers have that protection when they're booking these package holidays. And then that in turn means that package organisers are responsible for being liable for their suppliers and the performance of the actual travel service itself. They're also responsible for full refunds and maybe compensation too in the event that there are significant changes or cancellations. If you sell a package holiday as well, and under the regulations, you also need to financially protect that package. This is really to ensure that customers aren't left stranded on the other side of the world should a company go bust, because we've seen recently some of the major travel companies go and file for insolvency. And then lastly, if you're selling packages as well, you're also responsible for providing information before and after the package holiday is booked. And as we've said on the slide there, this may be a bit of a dull area or a dry area, but it's it's very important, and you could find yourself in some real trouble if you fail to meet your information obligations. So if we go to the next slide, I think we go into a bit more information about liability. So in terms of liability, what are we really discussing there? So in simple terms, the package organizer is liable for the performance of the travel service, and that's regardless of whether that service is performed by their supplier. So, for example, if you're selling a hotel and a rugby package holiday to a say the Six Nations game, if your customer then comes home, not home, but comes back to the hotel after going to the rugby, and then slips on a wet floor, has a really serious accident. So although you don't own that hotel and you're not there yourself, they're just a hotel company that you've booked with, you're actually responsible for the performance of the accommodation. So that leads us to this worst case scenario, this nightmare scenario that we have on the slide, that in this case, you know, that the hotel are actually at fault. The claim is worth up to it's worth £5 million, and we've seen this firsthand. Some of these injury claims where there's serious injuries can be worth millions. So the regulations make it easier for UK consumers to bring the claim in the UK against the UK tour operator, rather than say bringing claims in different jurisdictions overseas. So then how can you protect yourself to ensure, you know, that you're not vulnerable to these claims, or at least you can limit your risk? So firstly, it's an obvious one, but you can audit your hotels just to make sure that, you know, you aren't dealing with any old cowboys, you know, that these are a proper hotel and they comply with their health and safety standards. You could audit your hotels yourself, or you could employ a third party to go out and carry out these audits for you. Also, another way is to obtain public liability insurance. So this is really important to make sure you have adequate cover, because, you know, accidents do happen. There is human error. And ideally as well, you would want your own suppliers to have their own liability insurance. So in that example with the hotel accident with the customer falling, you would also hope that the hotel has their own insurance. So, you know, you've got your own insurance and your suppliers got their own insurance too. And then lastly, it's always good to have a supplier agreement with your suppliers, and this should include a full indemnity. So in the supplier agreement, there will be an indemnity clause that says that your supplier will indemnify you for any loss that you incur as a result of their, you know, wrongdoing or negligence. And we see these supplier agreements work in practice all the time, where a customer brings, you know, a claim against a package organizer. The package organizer then speaks to their supplier and say, look, we've got this agreement. You need to indemnify us, and then that's the way it's supposed to work, and it works quite well in a lot of scenarios. But you need to make sure you've got that indemnity in your supplier agreement. Okay, so if we move to the next slide, we're then considering refunds. So the worst case scenario here is something I hope we all hope that doesn't happen again. You know, the COVID 2025, the pandemic was a really controversial time in the industry, because as part of your obligations in the regulations, if an organizer can't supply a package holiday that the customer has booked, the customer is entitled to cancel the package without paying any termination fee if there's an unavoidable or extraordinary event. And then the additional obligation is that the package organizer needs to pay these refunds within 14 days. So in that nightmare scenario, we've got hundreds of bookings that need to be cancelled. You've already paid your suppliers in full, and then you now need to pay, you know, these customers within 14 days. So I think it's quite obvious. You could see how something like that could really impact a business and potentially put a lot of businesses on the brink of insolvency. And again, so we've mentioned there that you've already paid your suppliers in full. It's pretty standard in the travel industry for suppliers to request full payment a long time before the trip's due to go ahead. I know that several airlines request payment as soon as these bookings are made. But again, considering how best we can protect ourselves. So firstly, you can negotiate favourable payment terms with your suppliers. For example, you could agree that you don't need to release the monies until shortly before the start of the package, and hopefully that's something you can, hopefully that's a negotiation you can have with your suppliers. Secondly, managing the cash flow. For example, you could put customers' monies into a trust until that trip is completed. And then lastly, another thing that package organisers can do, one real benefit of the regulations is that the regulation states that package organisers can seek redress from any third parties that have contributed to the package organiser paying out any monies in relation to these regulations. So that could be a helpful tool for package organisers to try and recover money from their suppliers. For example, if you were selling flights and an airline cancelled a flight, you would have to pay out the customer, but you could then try and seek redress from the airline in that scenario. So yeah, I think the key takeaway point from both those last two slides is to try and ensure that you have really robust contracts with your suppliers, as they'll be very important if things do go wrong. Okay, I'm now going to hand back to Nick, who I think is going to discuss insolvency protection.
So we're blasting now through these 4 key things for packages, the 4 headlines as we see it. So I would say there, number 1 is liability, being responsible for your suppliers. Number 2, being responsible for refunds, really, really important. And now number 3, we're moving on to insolvency section, also very important. Why? I think in red there at the bottom, you can see how important it is, because it's technically a criminal offence if you are selling packages, and these regulations apply. The regulators spot this, your competitors spot this, they'll tell the regulator, and you are potentially in trouble. In reality, I don't think anyone's going to send you to prison, because I would expect that you would probably get a warning. They would ask you to comply and so on and so on. But certainly anyone that the regulators thought was deliberately flouting the rules, I think that's there for a reason, to make sure they can force companies to comply. So it is important. There's serious consequences. But yeah, I mean, what's the purpose of insolvency protection? There's 2 key reasons. Connor mentioned repatriation. So we've seen situations, certainly when Thomas Cook collapsed, possibly Monarch. So people being stranded abroad. So this ensures that there's money in a pot to bring everyone back home to the UK if it's abroad, or if it's vice versa. There could be, if you sold it to French customers, it's to ensure that they can get back to France from if they're stranded in Scotland. So the second reason is to protect customer monies against the insolvency of the package organizer. So it's not about your suppliers falling insolvent, it's about you as the package organizer. So if you've got all this money, where's it gone? It's essentially a mechanism to protect the money. So there's different ways of doing it. 4 options. I'm going to go backwards actually. So there's trust account. I think trust accounts quite possibly will be the one method of interest to most people in here, because I expect there's a lot of small businesses who are not selling flights, for example. So ATOL is only for when you're selling flights. So you have to use it if you're selling flights. That's the end of the conversation. You have to use that if your package includes flights. If it doesn't, you cannot use it, and you have to use one of these other 3. So there are ways to have bonding through ABTA or ABTOC. They're the only 2 bonding approved providers in the UK. However, I don't know the figures and the stats, but they generally have a threshold for only taking on businesses that are of a certain size. Doesn't mean you have to be massive, but certainly very small companies may get turned away, so that might not be a viable option. But obviously speak to them, find out, and it's an option for the future if not now. So then you have insurance. So real simple, you speak to an insurance broker. If anyone wants leads, there's certainly a few specialist insurance brokers in the UK. We can put you in touch, and it's as simple as it sounds. You have an insurance policy. If your business fails, that insurance company pays out. It will refund any customers that need the money back, and it will repatriate, cover the costs for anyone who's stranded from wherever they came from. And so so then a trust account. So it has to be, in all of these cases, a UK product. So if it's an insurance product, you see the word UK, it has to be a UK insurance policy. A German one might be accepted in Germany and all of Europe, but it's no longer the case that we have to accept it in the UK. So it has to be a UK insurance product. And in the same way, for a trust account, it has to be a UK trust. You can't have all this money squirreled away in a different country. It has to be in the UK. It has to be independent. I think that's the most important thing. It has to be independent. What does that mean? I think it's to some extent common sense, but if you think you can be clever by saying, oh, I'll let my friend do it, or, you know, my brother-in-law. If you in reality have any sort of influence or control over that pot of money, then it's not independent. So usually you end up having to pay someone, because why would anyone want to look after someone's monies and their business essentially, and all that admin if they weren't getting paid? But there are various companies that do that. In fact, you could literally search for, you know, local law firms, because a lot of law firms that deal with sort of wills and probate, they're used to dealing with trusts, so they potentially could help. But there are some bigger companies, so PTS, Protected Trust Services, TTC, I forget what all these abbreviations stand for, but you've got the Travel Trust Association, the Travel Trust something else with a C, all these abbreviations. I probably should have written them all down, but if anyone's interested in contacts, I can put you in touch with these companies. So they basically offer this as a specialist service. So they'll be the trust provider, they'll administer and do all this for you for, of course, a fee. So that's insolvent section, really important. Those are the 4 options. And like I say, we can point you in the right direction. If you wanted to look into trusts, you know, we could draft you a trust if you were going to sort of do it on a small local level rather than through a big company. Because again, those big companies like PTS and so on, they might only deal with a certain size of company. So we can help you, whether it's a lead for an insurance broker, or we could draft a trust account. You know, there are things we can help you with there. So that takes us on, I think, to the 4th of our 4 key points. Information requirements. So as we said and we warned you, this is a dull area. It's very dull, and to be honest, a lot of these things most people would just do anyway, naturally, because there's a lot of real basics involved here. But it's important just to understand what these information requirements are, because the key point is they have to give certain information before the booking is made. So it's all very well saying, "Oh, yeah, we'll give it you, you know, later on." But you know, this critical thing. So schedule 1, like I say, there's too many schedules. Look at all these schedules, but the first one, it's got the basics in. So I'm not listing them out here, but you have to give things like, you know, where are we going to? How am I getting there? Is my flight going straight to Rio de Janeiro, or am I going via LA? What sort of standard accommodation am I going to be in? Is it all inclusive? So all these things are kind of obvious. Like, you know, you would probably never try and sell anything without giving a lot of this basic information. But, you know, I do see it happen. You know, an example there is flight routes. Some companies might not give the full picture as to what the flight route is and the itinerary. There might be some gaps there. So schedule 1. So I've not listed the schedule here. There's a lot of information in there, but you know, it's certainly a follow-up discussion, or if anyone wants to look into the regulations, you'll find there schedule 1. This is the information before you book. Really important. And then we have 1, 2, 3 schedules covering different scenarios. So essentially, this is, you have to give customers a notice, say these are your rights. You have bought a package. These are your rights. You've bought a package, therefore blah blah blah. And there's basically some standard wording that you have to give to people. In fact, it's very similar to when you get a flight. Airlines should, but whether they do or not, they should give a similar warning for flights, you know, delays, to say your flight's been delayed, these are your rights, blah blah blah. And it's like a standard bit of text. So that text depends on whether they've booked through a website and you can use web links, or whether it's over the phone, or it's a click through package. Whatever that is, probably a very rare thing that no one's going to need to worry about at this stage. But basically, the standard text, you just have to copy and paste it into your booking process, or if it's on the phone, perhaps it's something you could recite over the phone or just follow up in writing, but as long as it's before the booking is made. So schedule 5, this is now, I guess, essentially at the time of booking. So terms and conditions is probably a good place to put this, the booking documents. So our commercial team deal with this day in, day out. So there's bits and bobs there. I'm not going to go into the detail as to what's in there. Nothing terribly exciting or interesting, but it's just checklist, making sure you tick the boxes. Because like I say, if you look at the top and remind ourselves, there's that risk that there's a criminal offence. And if a customer cottons onto this and thinks, hey, hang on, you didn't comply with these regulations, and you know, someone's been a bit of a smart aleck, then they might say, well, I want a refund. I would never have booked this unless you'd have told me. So, you know, it gives them a bit of leverage, I think, in any argument, especially when you think a regulator might be interested that you're not doing things by the book. And then there's a final 4 schedules for LTAs, which stands for linked travel arrangements, which I'll talk about shortly. They are even less interesting in information requirements, so we're not going to spend any time talking about that. We'll skip on to the next slide, and I'll just give a few examples. So these are examples of some of the things in, so I think these come from Schedule 1. So this is information before the booking is made. So the total price. So yes, that seems obvious, but there's a little thing here about additional costs that cannot be calculated. So there may be things that you can't calculate at the time of booking. I'm not sure, but for example, tourist tax sounds like something you should know about. So the customer shouldn't have to pay that on arrival. But if there is something for some reason where, you know, I don't know, maybe it's an excursion or crossing some sort of border, you're in some sort of strange countries, you know, most people are going to be in Scotland. So I'm not really sure what examples I can think of there, but if there was something there that can't be calculated, you don't have to, you just have to warn the customer, you know, that this is the total price, except for, you know, an asterisk, you know, you may have to pay a little bit for X, Y, Z. Entry requirements, so general information. So don't get carried away with this. It's general information. Literally point people in the right direction. It's not your responsibility as a package organizer to check everyone's paperwork and make sure that they can get to such a place. But it is important to warn people and give this information. Classic example is someone gets on a flight, they think they're going to Buenos Aires, but the flight is routed via America, and it turns out they can't go through America because they don't have an ESTA, and they're never going to get one because they've got a criminal record. And all of a sudden they're blaming you, you're having an argument, they're saying, you should have told me this, and you're saying, well, it's your responsibility. And then they're saying, yes, but I didn't know I was going through, you know, LA. Okay, but let's say they did know, you know, they did know they were going through the USA. You know, you don't have to sit there and, you know, write down everything that they need to do, because these things change. They change every day. In the pandemic, they were changing every minute, every hour. So you can get away with something fairly basic, a pointer, say, here's the FCDO website, check here, keep checking it, over to you, it's your responsibility. But, you know, you need to flag up that this is a thing that they need to check these things, whether it's vaccinations, visas, passport requirements. Obviously, some companies might want to go above and beyond and help out the customers, but if you've got a big customer base, it becomes impractical. So then special requirements. So if you've got people with reduced mobility and you're trying to send them on a hiking tour around the up Ben Nevis, then people may struggle. So you need to sort of factor that in and think about how you cater for those sort of customers. Making sure where possible people are not excluded, but, you know, giving the information if people cannot do it, if it's just not possible, you have to say, you know, you can come on this, but this part of the tour you might have to sit out on, because it's, you know, there is no lift that's going to take you to Ben Nevis. It's not like Snowdon, where you can actually get on a train, for example. And then there's another final example, the identity. So this is something that you might not think to give. It's not that obvious, but you have to give your trading name, your postal address, and an email for your company. And I think the reason for this is if you fall out with a customer, they want to know who they can complain to, who they can sue. I know claimant lawyers are often struggling to find out this sometimes. They look at the terms and conditions and think, well, who am I actually suing? Who is this company? You know, who did he belong to? Are they part of a big group? Is it a self-employed person with a trade name? So that's something you might not think to give. So that just gives you an idea that it's not all obvious things. There are some subtle points in there. So I think that's it now for information requirements, unless I've got many more slides. No, so that's it for information requirements. And something I've sneaked in here that I don't want to talk about too long, because everyone hates linked travel arrangements. Very few people are selling them, and the regulators have very little interest in them, and very few people even understand them. And even now, when I come to do, you know, this sort of presentation for probably the 50th time, I have to sit and remind myself exactly what certainly the first type of a linked travel agent is. But the second, I'll start with the second type, because I think that's something familiar that we can all relate to. So typical example, you book a flight, pretend you're a customer, you book a flight with Ryanair, And then straight away Ryanair say, hey, you know, you're going to wherever. Yeah, do you want to book a hotel? Do you want to book a hotel? Do you want to book a hire car? And they keep sort of targeting you. So the key point there is you've booked something through someone, and then you're getting targeted. So if that customer books something else within 24 hours, that could be a linked travel arrangement. So it's not a package because they weren't booked together at the same time, but it could be this linked travel arrangement. So a linked travel arrangement, in short, is a very light version of a package. Really, you have to give the information requirements and you must protect the client monies. So you don't have all of these obligations which have been through, you know, liability for suppliers, refund obligations. You don't have to worry about all of these things, but there's just some light requirements. You still have to protect the monies, but only for so long as you've got them, and you have to comply with some of these information requirements. So that's the example which is most familiar. But yes, so the other example, let's say a customer goes into a shop in real life or on a website, then they sort of select two different travel services. So they're not pre-arranged, they've not been combined, and they're from different providers. So, you know, let's say someone's gone on your website and it's neither of these things are sort of sold by you, but you know, they've bought an excursion with someone that you work with, and they've bought some sort of hire car, you know, for someone that you work with. And then they pay for each of these things separately, two different providers, two different contracts. So that example could be a linked travel arrangement. So if anyone wants to dig into those things more, if they are of any concern, by all means, happy to discuss either today or as a follow-up. But the bottom line is there, most people don't need to worry about these things, but it does come up. So that's it for linked travel arrangements. And potentially that might be everything for today's presentation. So I think that's nicely slotted into 50 minutes. So we've been through, that's our crash course. We've done it. We've been through, we've explained when you need to worry about the regulations, what a package is, and those sort of 4 key points, you know, as to what you need to think of if you are selling packages. So, you know, as a follow-up, just a quick flag, you know, who Travlaw are. You know, we provide our whole existence is to serve the travel industry. So the idea is if you're in the travel industry, everything you need that's legal, we can help you. So whether it's regulatory advice, which is what we're talking about today. So today we're talking about the package travel regulations, but GDPR, cookies, all these sort of things. If you need terms and conditions drafted, our commercial team can help. Me and Connor are actually in the litigation team. So claims, disputes, regulatory, whether it's with regulators or business, you know, your suppliers, or whether you're the supplier, you know, sort of a B2B dispute, we can help with that. Our colleague Amy is all into employment, which is always changing. So looking after your employees and so on, moving regulations. And then, you know, all the sort of business, intellectual property, all these things. So, you know, we can help with these things. So, but really the focus for Q&A today, if anyone has any questions, is obviously on today's presentation. So we're talking about package travel regulations. So happy to take any questions. I'll have a quick look myself. So I think Ian has asked any link for options for insolvency protection. So certainly I can follow up. You've got our email address there, Ian. So if you want to just drop us an email, I'll have a look. There's probably at least 2 or 3 specialist insurance. I wouldn't want to. There's one that sticks out at the top of my head, but I'd probably rather just give you all 2 or 3 that I know of, and then you can make your own choice on that one. Likewise for anyone else who wants to steer in the right direction. So Alistair has asked, so if a tour, for example, a painting holiday, okay, there's a lot of niche businesses. That's what we love about the travel industry. There's so many creative business people out there. So we've got a painting holiday, includes a tutor, could be classed as educational, or would it require some kind of qualification? Yeah, so interesting. I think, like I said, this could lead into a grey area. So I think it all comes down to what is the purpose of this painting holiday. So if this came as, you know, who's organised this, for example, if it was organised by a school for, you know, if this is like if this is educational, then yes, potentially the tutor element could be a tourist service. Well, one that which you don't have to worry about. It's not a tourist service, therefore you don't have to worry about that part. However, let's say you've sold accommodation and flights, that's already a package, so it doesn't really matter too much. whether that's a tourist service or not. But if I were to do this as a hobby, if I was to book on this package just because I love painting, then that's not for educational purposes. So that wouldn't be a tourist service. So if it's like, for example, you're selling accommodation plus this painting, that's when it gets interesting, and it's going to depend on the purpose. I don't think necessarily it needs to be an official qualification. I've seen people argue that. I've never seen an authority that really supports it. I can see some logic in it, but it's like I said with outdoor education, it's well recognized in that example that outdoor education is a good thing. It's good for children. They don't have to be trying to get a piece of paper. They don't have to be doing the Duke of Edinburgh. So I don't think it needs to be a professional qualification or a course. But like I say, I have seen people argue otherwise. But of course, people are arguing otherwise because they normally want money out of my clients, or insurance companies trying to get money back from cancelled holidays. So I'm not sure if there's any other questions. I'm not sure if you've got any, Alison.
I think we've got. Yes, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Connor. I think we've got a couple of hands up now. I'm not sure if that's still the hands up from your poll earlier today, but I'll just ask and I'll unmute Douglas. I'll just see whether, can you hear us? Can you speak to us?
I think everyone's rapidly putting their hands down before they get put on the big screen. Oh, I think we've got another question in the meantime.
That's fine.
So I'll have a look. I'll have a look at Caroline's question first, and then see if those hands are still showing. If anyone wants to actually ask a question verbally. So Caroline asks, if we organise retreats which offer accommodation and experiences that are booked at the same time, would we need to comply? Okay, so I think this is a similar question to. It's going to depend on the detail. So accommodation is a travel service. So that's one. So then it's all a question as to what these experiences are. So this is recorded, so by means you can look back and you can see the slides yourself. So there was the two tests. So this experience, is it a tourist service? Is it a significant tourist service? If you've either marketed it as being significant because you've said, come for this, magic spa treatment in, I don't know, Loch Lomond or something, some magic sort of. I'm trying to use my imagination as to what weird and wonderful things people might come up with, but let's say it's been marketed that way. That's the key point. That might make it significant. That would make it significant, and then that could make it a package. And so, yeah, wellness retreats, 4x4 training. But the other thing is the cost. So even if you've not marketed it as being, the key part of the trip. If you've marketed it as come here for the wellness retreat, game over. It's going to be a significant tourist service. It's a package. Doesn't matter how much it's cost. If someone just happens to have said, I'm going to book accommodation, and then they look on your website and they go, oh, I can do a wellness retreat. Oh, I'll add that. That's an extra. At that point, we look at the cost. And if the cost is more than 25% of the total package, if the wellness retreat is worth more than 25% overall, that makes it significant. And then you've sold two travel services. You've sold the accommodation, a significant tourist service, and therefore a package. So I think that should clarify that. And then, they keep coming in. Just as a finish, Callum McNee. If I sell accommodation and transport to a US client, that does not come under PTS. So yeah, good question. It's not. Well, first of all, it doesn't come down to where people are from. So US customers could be in the UK. So it's not whether your nationality that determines this. It is, we say, where you target your business, where you are marketing into. So if you've marketed into the US and that's how you found the customer, then even though that might have been a package in the UK, you can devise your business so that you don't have to worry about the regulations, but you need to be careful. You definitely need a bit of further advice on this. What I would say, first of all, is you would speak to a US lawyer to make sure you comply with the US law rules, whatever those may be, probably very low. But also you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. So what some people do is they might think they're selling to the US, but then the terms and conditions say English law applies. And then it's like, oh, hang on. Does that mean the regulations apply? So you've accidentally sort of shot yourself in the foot. You could have avoided the regulations, but you've done something wrong. And like I said, there's another example about where the booking is made. It's a very technical point, which I don't want to go into, but there's just little booby traps there. So you really need to have that vetted just to make sure that you're doing it right. So the answer is yes, potentially you can avoid the regulations, but you just got to check a couple of things and make sure you're doing it the right way.